This Sunday on Capital Connection, Governor Pritzker's pension proposal comes under the microscope as economists give their reaction.
Some will criticize this approach.
It doesn't solve your problems, but it does reduce pressure on the budget.
Democrat Rob Martwick and Republican Mark Batinick debate the future of pensions in Illinois. And you've heard of the Green New Deal, but could it take shape in Illinois first? And joining us on a reporters roundtable for the first time, Jeff Rogers from the Illinois Press Foundation and Peter Hancock from Capital News, Illinois. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol, this is your Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell. Governor Pritzker flip-flopped on pensions. His first budget proposal calls for something exactly the opposite of what he promised on the campaign trail. Back then candidate Pritzker said he wants to increase payments to the pension fund. This time in his first budget, the governor said he wants to shortchange or shave nearly $900 million in a combined total from all 5 of the Illinois pension systems. That's a move that critics say only kicks the can farther down the road, or in Illinois, farther along the ramp.
The ramp is what it's called, and so we have a payment schedule to kind of get us on track.
Former Republican Governor Jim Edgar installed that ramp, but it hasn't worked out as well as he had hoped.
The well-intentioned architects predicted that in fiscal year 2020, we would spend $4.9 billion on pensions. Instead, the bill today is $9.1 billion.
Pension payments are a big chunk of what you have to take into account when you're trying to do a budget.
By the year 2045, Illinois is supposed to reach a pension funding level of 90%, or just over $25 billion a year. Right now, it sits at just over 40% funded. The Edgar ramp is sagging under the pressure of an economic downturn in 2009 and rising cost of benefits to retirees. Instead of increasing payments now, as he recommended on the campaign trail, Governor Pritzker has a different idea. Extend the ramp.
And we will smooth the pension ramp by modestly extending it. We're simply taking a pension amortization schedule and extending it by 7 years.
The about face drew negative reviews from friends and foes alike. Without a progressive income tax, the left-leaning Center for Tax and Budget Accountability calling it incomplete. Fitch credit ratings say it introduces considerable risk. S&P Global Ratings says Pritzker's plan punts to future years, all while the Civic Federation warns the state's fiscal condition is still deteriorating.
It doesn't solve your problems, but it does reduce pressure on the budget.
Illinois GOP Chairman Tim Schneider says it's a recipe for disaster. Pritzker himself acknowledges the pressure, but paints it as an opportunity for leverage to pass another one of his campaign promises.
After we pass a fair tax in Illinois, that we're putting $200 million per year more into the system than is required under the pension law. Ultimately, the fair tax must be part of the long-term solution to our pensions.
And joining us now to debate the future of pensions in Illinois is Representative Mark Batinick, a Republican from Plainfield, and Democrat Rob Martwick from Chicago's Northwest Side, I believe.
Yes.
That's right. Good to have you both with us. You chair the Pension and Personnel Committee, so this is very near and dear to your heart, something you've wrestled with, grappled with for a long time, this issue of pensions. Was Governor Pritzker's pension proposal a step forward or a step backward?
Well, I think if you look at it in totality, his plan is not just this year. As he mentioned in his budget, this is a bridge year to get us to a point where he intends to add money to the equation, and that's something that hasn't been done for pensions in a long time. So his intent is to raise revenue, add revenue to the help pay down the pension debt, and put us on a path to fiscal stability. So I think if taken with that, if we can put all those pieces together, it is a plan to get us in the right direction. There's no doubt, but this is the first step.
So he's saying the fix is coming, but you've got to wait for it, and you've got to vote for it, it being that progressive income tax, and then that fix is to throw an extra $200 million a year into the pension systems. Is that enough to move the needle?
Not even close. So, if you look at our pension liability, it's $135 billion. And his fix, if we get the progressive income tax, is just throw an extra $200 million at that liability. Basically, that's like saying I have a $13,000 credit card bill, and I'm going to add $2 a month extra to help pay that down. So proportionally, it's not a large dynamic fix to the problem. We have to do much more. I have a proposal that talks about adding an additional $2.4 billion right away to the pension system.
Well, what are you going to cut to make that happen?
Well, if you look at, we had pension obligation bonds that just came off the books that are almost $1 billion. We seem to have a spending spree going on in Springfield right now, and the two issues that are facing the state are pensions and property taxes. So if we're going to talk about revenue from marijuana, if we're going to talk about revenue from gaming, we should look at fixing our biggest problem, which is the pension problem. So the money's there.
It sounds like he's making an argument of priorities, that pensions should be farther up on the list. Governors in the past have been tempted to shave from the pensions because it's not today's problem, it's tomorrow's problem, and everybody can't retire at once. What's the right balance of priority there?
Well, I agree. I think Mark and I both agree that pension should be a top priority in the state. We have to pay it down. And there's a saying that I've been fond of saying lately, which is, I haven't yet figured out a way to get rid of a debt by putting less money towards it, right? So we have to find a way to increase the amount of money that we're paying into the pension system. When you front load that payment schedule, Mark's talked about $2.5 billion. I've talked about $1 billion a year supplemental. The governor's at $200 million. But we have to find that revenue, right? We're looking at a $3.2 billion budget shortfall. We have to find a way to get that revenue and put it into the pension system and front load. If we do that, there can be massive savings down the line. Massive.
Help our audience understand how we went from last year at the end of May. Everybody in this building was saying, this is a balanced budget. We finally found a balanced budget. Leader Durkin was saying this. Senate Leader Bill Brady was saying this. Everybody was saying it was balanced. And then all of a sudden, well, maybe it's out of balance by $500 million or $500 million. And then maybe it's out of balance by $1 billion. And now Governor Pritzker's saying it's out of balance by $3.2 billion. How did that erosion occur from last year's budget until now? And how do we know it's not going to happen after this budget is put into place?
Well, what I would say is that it didn't really come as a terrible surprise to me. According to the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, which is our nonpartisan financial and economic forecasting entity, nonpartisan, they did a study for me that said that we are on a path to, if everything remains the same, and with the current 4.95% tax, we're on a path to accumulate an additional $224 billion in debt over the course of the next 20 years. So we've got a massive structural debt problem, and we need to address that, right? That is, there's no doubt we have to address that problem, and so much of that is tied to the growth of our pension debt, right? So our pension debts are so large and they're growing, we've got to find a way to get a hold of that. So, some of the things that we've done in our pension committee, working together, pension buyouts are beginning to nibble around the edges of the debt and start to contain the costs of that debt. We're looking for cost reduction measures, but ultimately all of those fixes that we can explore mean nothing if we don't add money to the equation.
It sounds like he's saying shaving $878 million from the pension fund that Governor Pritzker is proposing now might be risky, but could be worth it if it pays off down the road through that progressive income tax. If the federal government has a progressive income tax, and if 30-some states, 36 states, I believe, have a progressive income tax, why is there something inherently unfair?
Well, yeah, I'll go straight to that, and to the $878 million. The idea that shorting pensions almost $900 million for several years, and then adding back in only $200 million several years later, after that $900 million has accumulated interest lost, essentially, that's not going to move pensions in the right direction. When you want to start talking about a graduated income tax, I mean, you look at the states that are that are Democrat-run with the graduated income tax, it's a tax increase on the middle class, and it's not insignificant. We have a habit of spending money that we don't have, and you talked about last year's budget. The Thompson Center was in the budget again. We've been counting on the Thompson Center's sale in the budget year after year after year. Those are the reasons why there's a budget shortfall, because we have these gimmicks, we have these one-time hits. We have to look at things structurally, and we have to prioritize. And one of the things that we need to prioritize is a long-term solution on pensions that doesn't include shorting payments. We need a long-term, stabilized solution.
You mentioned that the progressive income tax was a hit on the middle class. The hardest hit would, of course, be on the richest in our state. But I want to give you a chance. Representative, I think you've proposed some progressive income tax measures before.
I have, yeah.
Would your plan hit the middle class? And who are we talking about there?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define the middle class. But what I did was I proposed a 2 years ago, I proposed a progressive rate structure that would adopt the income tax rates of the state of Wisconsin. And if you do the math, if you look at the actual tax rates paid and you account for how I took money in my budget or in my proposal, I put $1 billion supplemental payment towards pensions to reduce the pension debt, save $60 billion over the course of the next, by 2045, by 2038. It would shave 7 years off the repayment ramp and save $60 billion. I put $3.5 billion into property tax reduction, which roughly is an 11% across the board property tax cut for every piece of property in the state of Illinois.
So you're saying it's worth it? It can do a lot of good things, but who has to pay more to get it done?
Well, under my proposal, it was, if you compare it to the 6.5% flat tax that we would need to accomplish the same thing, really anyone making under $200,000 would pay less taxes.
Compare it to what our tax rate is now?
Then the break-even point, I believe, is about $100,000.
So he's saying people that make under $100,000 a year would get a tax cut or stay the same?
Yes. Overall, when you compare property tax, when you add in property tax relief, so under that plan, the break-even point for a family making $70,000 a year, the tax rates, the income tax is about the same, but my plan, as opposed to the current plan, included $3.5 billion of property tax relief and $1 billion of sales tax rate relief, which every family, every person would experience. Lower property taxes, lower rents, lower sales taxes spent on the goods that you purchase. When you put all those metrics together, the overall taxes that you pay in this state, income, property, and sales, would decrease dramatically for anyone making $70,000 a year or less.
Representative, I imagine that might sound appealing to people who make $70,000 a year or less. How do you...
Well, you said the break even is $70,000. I mean, and for a married couple, pretty soon our minimum wage is going to be just below $70,000 a year. So that break even point is a pretty low number, and we have a hard time meeting our goals. And with what the governor did, the thing that was the most troubling to me, that I want to get out what the governor said was, we're going to go through this dramatic tax increase, including a progressive income tax, for only $200 million extra for pensions. That is nibbling around the edges. That's not dynamic, that's not bold. Some of the things that Rob is suggesting is a lot more bold, but that's not what the governor's suggesting.
And the governor's running a campaign, meanwhile, that says, think big, Illinois. Are both of you going to pressure the governor to think bigger on the contributions that he puts into the pension systems, either in this year's budget or in budgets down the road?
Well, and
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's no doubt that we have to have bold initiatives, and I think the governor is going to do that. I think it's a little premature to criticize his graduated rate structure proposal when there is none yet, right? So he's just begun the process of trying to figure out where that rate structure should be. My proposal was never meant to be the end result. It was meant to be an illustration. I proposed it during the heart of the Rauner administration. I had no misgivings that this would actually be adopted. It was meant to be an illustration. The Governor Pritzker is going to sit down with the legislature, and we're going to find a rate structure that we feel that we can put out to people, but it's not out there yet. So to criticize it at this point is way premature.
All right, we got more details here than we got from J.B. Pritzker on what he would propose for a graduated income tax at any time during his campaign. He always said he would negotiate with the legislature. So maybe we'll see some of those details emerge in the weeks and months to come. Representative Martwick and Batinick, thank you both for joining us. We're back in a moment with a look at what some might call a Green New Deal for Illinois. Stick around.